Hello, my name is Sharon Flores. I am a PSJ teacher. I teach third grade. The chapter that I got is chapter 3, which is English phonology. So, phonology has to do with the study of sounds for a particular language. We have phonics, which are universal for all the languages, but this one's going to focus only on the English one. So, it was a very informational chapter because it was very specific on phonology. And basically, phonology, if you have ever taken the dyslexia training, I know I took the Herman Method dyslexia training, and they taught us about this, which is when you're producing sounds, there are certain things that you're doing with your lungs, with your tongue, with your lips. So that's what we're going to be learning about. I'm not going to lie, it was a bit challenging because it is just a lot of information. I had that dyslexia training, so I had that background knowledge on all of this, so it was very easy for me to understand. But even then, it's just, I wouldn't be able to memorize all the things that you have to do. I mean, I would, right? But with more studying. Human communication seems to happen effortlessly. And I got this motto from the book. It seems to happen, right? But in reality, human communication is more complex than the common sense view. So on the PowerPoint, you can see a list of things that affect the way that we communicate. And I don't want to read verbatim, but in a gist, listeners predict, confirm predictions. Listeners make inferences to fill in information not included in the message. Social context helps determine the meaning. Gestures, so situations, role, status of the speaker and listener all affect the meaning of messages. So it's not just sound. They say it's more than that. There's other factors that affect how we give out a message and how we receive a message. A more complex model. Linguists have developed complex models to describe human communication. They attempt to account for the different factors involved in communication. Successful communication depends on speakers and listeners sharing knowledge of references, speaker and listeners sharing common feelings about people or places mentioned, and listeners have to decide if an utterance is literal or non-literal, direct or indirect. So they did give the example of Amelia. It's some books about this lady that she would just take everything literal. So it says, "Oh, Amelia laughed, Mr. Rogers. When I said make the bed, I didn't mean that." So she was literally making the bed. So that's where they talk about the literal, the not literal. Why use sound to communicate? Humans are social beings who seem driven to communicate. Deaf people develop the ability to communicate with gestures. Hearing people use sound. So why sound? Your hands are free for other tasks. So I can be communicating with you and I can be moving this, doing something else. The sound travels around corners and works much better than gestures in the dark. So even if it was dark, we'd still be able to communicate. As to oppose with, movement, we wouldn't be able to communicate in the dark. The complexity of sound production. So speech production is sufficiently complex that most researchers agree that it is an acquired capacity. The messages that the brain sends out to tighten and relax muscles that control speech are so complicated that they must be acquired. The features of speech are complex and automatic physical gestures which cannot be learned, but are among the biologically innate features that facilitate the acquisition of speech by human species. So it's so complex that animals can't develop. It's just something that we as humans have innate. I'm sorry. Even though hearing individuals use sounds to communicate, the biologically innate features that facilitate communication among humans may not be tied to sounds. What humans seem to have is the ability to use language to comprehend and produce meanings. She proposes that humans are born with a sensitivity to particular distributional, rhythmical, and temporal patterns unique to aspects of natural language structure. So basically, here it's just talking about how it's more than sound. There's a lot of other things that play a role in it, and we're gonna see as we go along how it's basically communication. How do you portray what you're trying to tell someone else? using linguistic concepts to evaluate methods of teaching people to communicate. Linguistic is the study of language. So there's different types. There's a historical linguist, social linguist, narrow linguist. This book is especially interested in examining those aspects of linguistics that provide insight into how people learn to read and write. Current approach supported by the U.S. Department of Education relies heavily on directly teaching the small parts of language, which is the letter name, the letter sound, now blend. Nevertheless, many teachers read to and with children in the belief that children can acquire literacy without direct instruction in the parts of the language, which would be like the whole language approach. Early approaches to second language teaching were based on the idea that second languages are learned and focus on the parts of language, grammar, and vocabulary. Current methods are based on acquisition model of second language development and focus instruction on providing comprehensible messages. So they're focusing more on the comprehension. Areas of linguistics such as phonology, morphology, and syntax can inform educators as they evaluate methods of teaching reading and methods of teaching second languages. English phonology. Phonetics is the study of sounds across languages, which is what I said in the beginning. Phonology is the study of the sounds used by speakers of a particular language, in our case, the English one. Phoneme is a sound that makes a difference in meaning in a language. Different languages use different sets of phonemes to communicate. English has about 42 phonemes, while Spanish has about 22, so English has way more. To determine whether a sound functions as a phoneme in a language, a linguist tries to find two words that differ by just one sound. So they use the example of pet and bet. They have a completely different meaning, and it's just the p and the b that change, those phonemes that differ. So the p and the p are they're phonemes because they can change the meaning. This example is evidence that a sound functions as a phoneme in language. So just a sound can change the complete meaning of a word. No alphabet has a one-to-one correspondence between sounds and letters. Instead, one letter may represent different sounds, and one sound may be represented by different letters or letter sequences. So in English, we see that a lot. Like the sound f can be represented by the letter ph, the letter f. So linguists have developed phonemic transcription, and basically this, I think where you see it is in the dictionary. So in phonemic transcription, each sound is represented by one and only one written mark. Example, the first sound of cat and kite is always written as k. So you see it here with the slash marks and the letter in the middle that makes a k sound. Phonemes are indicated by putting them between slash marks. It changes the meaning. Phonetic transcription within square brackets. So that one doesn't change the meaning if you see it in between the square brackets. Linguists describe phonemes by telling where and how they are produced. Each phoneme has unique articulatory properties. Each phoneme can be described by its place and manner of articulation and whether it is voice or not voice. And that's what we're going to be looking at. This is what I told you that they taught us at the dyslexia training, like to look in a mirror and check, right? Like how do you produce the word M? So I mean not the word M, the sound So you can see that it's voice. You feel it. Your lips you're blocking the air. So that's what we're going to be learning about. That's why it's saying phonemes by telling where and how they are produced. You get to see where and how you produce them. The phonemes of a language don't sound the same each time they are produced, but all the variations perceived as instances of the same sound by the speakers of a language. That is why linguists claim that phonemes are perceptual, not physical units. So it has to do with the perceptions of people. The physiology of speech. So I included this. This comes from the book because we're going to see tables that have this vocabulary. The bilabial, which it shows you on number 1, bilabial, meaning that you're going to use, like in Espanol, vi, los dos, tus labios, bilabial. Labiodental, and it shows you right here the interdental, the alveolar, alveopalatal, the velar, the uvular, the glottal. So I thought this was just very explanatory, a visual. You're gonna see in the tables how they talk about what part you're using when you're producing a certain sound. The speech sounds of English and other languages are formed by changes in the vocal tract, the area between the vocal cords and the lips. Air passes through the vocal cords, produces voicing when brought together, or no voicing where they are held apart. Air continues through the pharynx into the oral cavity. If the flow is not constricted, it produces vowel sound. Different vowel sounds result from the movements of tongues and lips. For all vowels, the air flows freely. So that means like if I go a, e, o, u, like the air is flowing freely. My mouth is not like closing. Different consonant sounds. Oh, it says consonant sounds are formed when the air is constricted as it moves towards the lips. So you have the b, the the n. So you see the change in my lips. Different consonant sounds depend on how and where the air is low or stopped. So it's like a b. See how I stop the air? Like my mouth moved. But if I do the it's completely stopping the air. Linguists refer to vowel sounds as syllabics and consonant sounds as non-syllabics. Vowel and consonant refer to sounds rather than letters on the alphabet. So phonology has to do more with the sounds. Knowing where sounds are produced can be helpful in understanding students' spelling. So I remember there was a child 2 years ago when I used to teach first grade, and I suspected that she was dyslexic, and I referred her, and she did turn out to be dyslexic, but I had gotten this Herman method dyslexia training. So I would tell her, look at my lips when I would do the spelling. And that would really help her, I remember. But it's just weird how you can tell, like she had good comprehension, but she just could not. She knew the letter names, she knew the letter sounds, she memorized, but she could not blend them. So when I did the spelling and I would tell her, look at my lips, it really helped her. So we're gonna see some of this here. English vowels, short, long, and reduced vowels. Short vowels are called lax vowels. They're called tense vowels relative to the tension of the muscles. All vowels in English are voiced, like I said. The ah, like you can see that ah, like you can feel vibration where voice is coming out. As in p, there's really no voice coming out. P, p, you don't feel vibration. Different vowels are formed by changing the shape of the vocal tract as the vibrating air molecules pass from one vocal cord toward the lips. Vowels vary considerably across dialects, and the number of vowels phonemes vary as well. Short vowels. There are 6 short vowel sounds in English, usually represented with just one letter. The table represents where the short vowels are produced in the areas of the mouth when looking from the left side. So again, you have the front, the central, the back. Like when you said put, so I guess it's produced in the back. When you said pot, it's produced in the back. Pet, pet, so you feel produce it in the front. Pit. Long vowels. The 7 long vowels of English are all made by starting with a vowel and adding a glide. The tongue moves from one part of the mouth to the other, also called diphthongs, from the Greek roots meaning 2 sounds. Long vowels are indicated with 2 letters. The first letter indicates the tongue position at the beginning of the sound, and the second letter shows the direction of the glide. So again, you have the beat, the bait, the boot, the boat, the bite. So you would see where the sound is produced in the front and the back. Reduced vowels. Produced with a weaker airflow, so the syllables in which they appear do not receive stress. These vowels occur in words with 2 or more syllables. And you have 2 kinds. You have the schwa and you have the high central vowel. One of the difficulties of English spelling is that many different vowel sounds are reduced to schwa or bird-eye, and these sounds can be spelled with almost any vowel letter. So that's always something that the kids have trouble with, that the English just the sounds can be represented with a lot of letters. English vowels. In total, there are 15 vowel phonemes, 6 short vowels, 7 long vowels, and 2 reduced vowels. System is further complicated by the effect of an R phoneme following a vowel. This action has an effect on the preceding vowel, giving it a quality that it does not usually have. It is not surprising that children have trouble learning to spell English words with the so-called R control vowels. Educators who understand the complexity of the English vowel system can better appreciate the difficulties children have as they attempt to represent these sounds they write. English learners often have difficulty learning the vowel sounds of English. An understanding of the vowel phonemes of English can be helpful for any educator working with English learners or students learning to spell English words. So I remember at the dyslexia training, they would tell us like how like the sound, the b sound, it's not supposed to be like b. The sound is not, because you're not supposed, like you kind of add another sound to it, like p. It's not supposed to be the b sound. It's supposed to be p, like p, not voiced. And it's weird how they say, I mean, that's what confuses the kids when they're trying to read. They're going to read pot, like instead of reading pot. English consonant phonemes. Consonant phonemes are produced by restricting or stopping the flow of air as it passes the vocal tract. So, like when you produce the like you're having to restrict the air as into where the vowels is more like like you're not restricting air with your mouth. Consonants can best be described by telling where and how the air is constricted, and by noting whether the sound is voiced or voiceless. So like t, d. Some of them are going to be the that one is voiced. The it's voiced. Consonants generally appear in matched pairs, one voiced and the other voiceless. Types of phonemes. You have the stops are formed completely by blocking the air for an instant and then releasing it. So the p, the v. So the p and the b are formed by stopping the air by closing the lips, bilabials. Some of the first sounds the babies produce, only difference between p and b is the voicing, t and t. These sounds are made by placing the tip of the tongue behind the front teeth along the alveolar ridge to block the air for a moment. The k and the g are formed by raising the blade of the tongue up against the velar region. So I know the kids usually have a lot of trouble with the t and the t. The fricatives are produced by constricting the airflow through the vocal tract. There are 9 fricatives, come in pairs except for the affricates are formed by briefly stopping the air and then releasing it with some friction. There are 2 affricates in English. Stops, fricatives, and affricates generally come in voiceless and voiced pairs. Nasals, liquids, and glides have more the quality of vowels because the air is not stopped or constricted as much, and 3 of these kinds of phonemes are voiced. The nasals, the the n, and then the last one, I couldn't find the symbol, but it's like an N with a tail of a G, has the sound of n in ring. English nasals are voiced. So when you say you feel the vibration here where you're producing a voice. Produced by stopping the air in the oral cavity and lowering the velum so that the airflow can pass through the nasal cavity. So Liquids. There are 2 phonemes called liquids, a descriptive term to denote the smooth sounds associated with l and r. So like liquids, they flow. These are the sounds that occur at the beginning of lo and roar. Glides, also called semi-vowels because they are produced with very little constriction of the air passage, more like a vowel. So again, like a vowel, remember you don't really constrict it. These 2 phonemes are the y sound at the beginning of yes and the w sound at the start of wet. The glide consonants only occur at the beginning of a syllable in English or as a part of a blend like in swing. They are produced by moving the tongue up toward the alveolo-palatal or velar region. The English phonology system. In all, American English has 24 consonant phonemes, 6 stops, 9 fricatives, 2 affricates, 3 nasals, 2 liquids, and 2 glides. Relatively easy to learn. Only 7 are represented by special mark. The rest use letters from the alphabet. The 25 consonant phonemes together with the 39 vowels make 39 phonemes in the English system. Teachers of young children sometimes worried, and I really like this one, that their students don't yet have sounds. But this concern usually reflects an inability of students to identify or produce certain sounds as part of a classroom exercise. Often young children simply don't understand what they are being asked to do. On the other hand, observation of children in natural communicative situations generally reveals that they do have their sounds. So a lot of them come talking, come producing sounds, right? And it doesn't mean that they don't know the sounds. They just don't make a connection with the instructions that you're giving them. And it happens a lot. I mean, I was a first grade teacher. I knew there was this little girl that knew how to speak. She just couldn't spell or read, but she knew her sounds. Phonotactics, the knowledge of the distribution of the sounds. Every language puts constraints on how the phonemes can be combined. English has a number of different consonant blends that are possible at the beginning of words, but some combinations never occur. There are also constraints on vowels. Young children who grow up in an English-speaking environment acquire knowledge of English phonotactics. This is subconscious knowledge. They use this information as they speak, but they can't explain how they know that certain combinations are possible and others are not. Part of acquiring a language is acquiring the phonemes, but people also acquire the knowledge of how to combine the phonemes into words. So it's just, I mean, it's like us in English. We just know how to use the language. It just makes sense to us because we are exposed to it every day, naturally, like the slideshow said in the beginning. But it's like if you hear people from Mexico, they learn English over there. But it's not like the English that we know here, it's not, I guess, because they're not part of it. They don't use it like frequently like we do, but it's just, we just know the rules. We don't know how we know them, but we know them, right? Like that some letters can be at the beginning, etc. Tongue twister. I really like how the tongue twister, the example that they put to represent that communication is more than sounds. What makes tongue twisters so difficult? Tongue twisters help show the upper limits on the capacity to produce language so easily. Most tongue twisters require the brain to send out different patterns to the muscles at the same time, and this may overload the capacity to produce meaningful languages. So this kind of, it was brought up at the end, how it's telling you, I mean, when you're going to produce a certain sound, your brain is sending message to, to close the lip, to give out air, to voice it. So a tongue twister makes you realize, like, it's not that easy. Like, you're trying to produce all these sounds and your body just, because your brain was trying to send the message, close them out, give out this air, constrictor, and so on. And they give you a website where you can find more tongue twisters. Conclusion. Despite the complexity of phonology, speakers of a language can produce sounds that convey meaning to listeners, and listeners can interpret these sounds. So all of this that we saw, it's very complex, but we're all able to produce them. Focus their attention on what they are saying and not how they are saying it. So we focus on the meaning, on the comprehension. Linguists argue that speech production and comprehension are so complex that they must be acquired and not learned. So my scholarly article, it was a little bit more on the social linguistics, but it did include phonology. So it was a study on African American children, and they were trying to see if, because you know how African Americans usually, they're the strugglers, right? So they were trying to see if their non-mainstream English dialect affected their reading. So they were given a receptive and expressive tasks that were sensitive to dialect stimuli. They were trying to find out whether this mispronunciation of mainstream English, like instead of saying first, they'll say first. Like they won't pronounce that last sound. Predicted their reading skills. Children showed to have knowledge of mainstream English, but once phonological awareness was accounted for, it could be concluded that this skill counted more towards their lacking reading ability. So, you know how they say that it's more complex, that it must be acquired and not learned? So this shows the importance, because they were saying, well, they struggle because they don't talk the way that mainstream English does. But in reality, when they also wanted to include the phonology part, right? And they saw that they did struggle with that, because the mainstream, they could tell, right? Like that there was a difference. They could tell that first you were supposed to say with a tip, but I guess they just chose to talk like that, right? And there was also two hypotheses on this article. And one of the hypotheses kind of said, you know, I mean, it does affect them, the mainstream, like they don't comprehend. But then the other hypothesis was like, hey, it's like us that we code switch, right? We have that meta-linguistic knowledge. Like we know how to say, pass me the jugo. Like we know that the word jugo is a noun, right? We know where to place it. So we do have that meta-linguistic knowledge. And the two questions was, do young mainstream American English speakers represent lexically more information about mainstream American English and about its relationship with non-mainstream American English than is evident from their overt pronunciations of words? 2. Does phonological awareness mediate the relationship between non-mainstream American English use and early reading achievement? So, in sum, the findings from the study showed that young NMAE, non-mainstream English speakers, phonological representations of words are not impaired or imprecise, but rather include a great deal of information about the standard forms that are typically represented in printed English. Moreover, their phonological awareness skills mediated the relationship between dialect variation and reading skills. So connection to Chapter 3. Chapter 3 talks about phonology and how linguistics can play a role in learning how to read. They also mention how speech production and comprehension are so complex that they must be acquired, not learned. Similarly, the findings suggest that readers who are not attuned to the ways in which language can be used flexibly and manipulated explicitly will be less able to appreciate how language is represented in the orthographic system and will have a much harder time learning how to read. So they're not aware of, not attuned to the ways in which language can be used flexibly and manipulated, which is the phonology. Thus, it is not surprising that phonological awareness mediated the relationship between dialect variation and word reading. Through this study, we were able to see the importance of teaching phonology. Even though they were trying to figure out if their non-mainstream American English dialect affected their reading, when taking into account phonological instruction, it was found that this attributed more. So it wasn't so much that they didn't speak like the way that it's like us Mexicans, right? I mean, we don't speak like that, us Hispanics. Like we code switch, but that doesn't affect whether we have good comprehension or not, because I feel that in order to make an effective code switch, you know, for it to make sense, you have to think, you know, does it make sense? Where am I going to place this word? So, you know, it just went to show the importance, because the chapter 3 is talking about the importance of phonology, and then here it's like it does matter, you know. So thank you so much for your time. I know I took very long, but it was a lot of information that I just thought was relevant and important, and I really hope that this overview, along with what you read, helps you connect better to understand chapter 3. Thank you.